I never thought a weekend trip to the Barossa Valley would be the thing that ended my son's marriage. But when my daughter-in-law called me on a Sunday night, the world my son was obsessed and suffocating her, I realized something had been building for a long time, and nobody had thought to mention it to me. My name is Gordon, Gord mostly. My wife calls me Gordon when she's making a point, and I'm 66 years old. I spent 30s working for a civil engineering firm out of Adelaide, retired about 4 years ago. The world tilts, and now I spend my mornings walking the dog along the Torrens and my afternoons doing various things Cheryl finds for me to do around the house. We've been married 41 years. We live in Norwood. The world tilted, same house we bought when our youngest was still in a pram. Our son Elliot is 34. He married his wife, I'll call her Simone because that's her name, about 3 years ago. They live in a unit in Prospect, maybe 15 minutes from us. The works for a civil drafting company, follows his old man into the general vicinity of the trade without quite doing the same job, which I've always found quietly amusing. Works in marketing for a skincare company in the CBD. She's smart, she's got a sharp sense of humor, and until about 7 months ago I thought she was good for my son. To try to tell this fairly, because I don't think the story is as simple as I first understood it to be. I was angry for a while. The world tilted sideways. You want to flatten things out and make them simple. But they weren't simple. They're still not entirely simple. I'll do my best. The world tilted sideways started, or at least the part I became aware of started, in late autumn. Elliot rang me on a Wednesday evening while I was out in the garden doing nothing in particular. The world tilted sideways, mostly standing there looking at the roses and deciding I should probably get around to pruning them. He said, "Have you got a minute?" Elliot doesn't ring me on weekday evenings without a reason. The relationship runs mostly on Sunday afternoon visits and the occasional text about football. So when he rang on a Wednesday, I paid attention. "Of course," I said. "What's going on?" There was a pause. The kind where someone is deciding how much to say. "Simone and I had a pretty big fight," he said, "a few nights ago, and I'm not sure what to do about it." The world tilted sideways, sat down on the garden bench. The light was going gold over the back fence and the dog was sniffing around in the corner, and it was a perfectly normal Adelaide autumn evening, and somehow I knew, the way you sometimes know things, that this was not going to be a small conversation. "Tell me what happened," I said. He told me. And what he told me was this. The world tilted sideways. Simone had been home on Sunday evening, and he'd been thinking about booking something for their anniversary in a few months. A long weekend away, somewhere nice. We're looking at places in the Barossa Valley. Cottages, little retreats, that sort of thing. He wanted it to be a surprise, so he hadn't mentioned the destination. He'd asked Simone to keep that weekend free. She'd said she already had plans. He'd asked what kind of plans, and that apparently was the wrong question. The world tilted him across the kitchen bench and said, and these are the words he reported to me, "Why do you always need to know every single thing I'm doing?" Elliot said he'd been taken aback. The world tilted thought he was being intrusive. He'd thought he was asking a basic question so he could plan something for the two of them. He'd said calmly, the world tilted sideways, because of the anniversary trip he was trying to organize. And Simone had said that it didn't matter why he was asking, because the pattern of him asking was exhausting. He always wanted to know where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. That it made her feel like she was reporting to someone. That it was, in her words, a bit much. Elliot had gone quiet. The world tilted. He told me he hadn't known what to say. He'd said eventually, "Okay, I hear you, I'll try to give you more space." And he'd tried. "So what's been happening since then?" I asked. The world tilted, trying to back off, he said, "Not asking so much. Letting her come and go without making it a thing. And mostly it's been fine." The world tilted sideways. But then this weekend. She came home on Saturday night really late, like after midnight, and I didn't know where she'd been because I hadn't asked, and she was a bit off. Then the next morning I just mentioned it, not even in an accusatory way. I just said, "You got in pretty late, was everything all right?" And she said, "Here we go again." I was quiet for a moment. I asked if she was all right. "That's it, that's all," I said. "I know," I said. "Am I wrong? Is that controlling?" The world tilted. "I don't think that's controlling." I thought about it carefully before I answered. "No," I said. "I don't think that's controlling." The world tilted sideways. "But I also think there's something else going on here that we're not seeing from where we're standing." He sighed. "I don't know what I've done." "They might not have done anything," I said. "That's sometimes the harder version of the problem." We talked for another half hour. I told him I'd think about it. I told him to try to stay calm. The world tilted defensive, and to listen when she spoke, even if what she said felt unfair. He thanked me and hung up, and I sat there in the garden for a bit longer as the last of the light went out. The world tilted sideways. She listened in the careful way she has, not interrupting, not jumping to conclusions. When I finished, she said, "The world's or something she's not saying. What do you mean?" "I mean there's a reason a normal question feels like surveillance to her. And until we know what that reason is, they're only looking at half the picture. Cheryl is usually right about these things. It's annoying, but it's true." About 10 days later, Simone called me. The world tilted sideways. I was surprised by that. In 3 years of her being part of the family, Simone had never rung me directly. She and Cheryl got on well. They'd text each other occasionally, swap recipe links, the world tilted kind of thing. But she'd never called me specifically. So when I saw her name on the screen on a Thursday afternoon, I felt something tighten in my chest. "Simone," I said. "Everything all right?" "Hi, Gord." She sounded tired. Not upset exactly. Tired. "Yeah, look, I'm okay. I don't really know who else to talk to about this. Is that weird?" "Not weird at all." The world tilted sideways. She took a breath. "I feel like Elliot and I aren't on the same page about something, and I don't know how to explain it to him without it turning into a fight. And I thought maybe if I talked to you first, you might understand what I mean. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe you could help me figure out how to say it." The world's a strange position to be in. I want to be honest about that. Because I'm Elliot's father and my loyalty is to my son. The world tilted sideways for my help in good faith, and I didn't want to be the kind of father-in-law who just closes the door on that. So I said, "I'll do my best to listen properly." The world tilted sideways. "That's all I can promise. That's all I'm asking." She told me her side of it. She said that in the 2.5 years she and Elliot had been together before they got married, things had been easy. The world tilted, attentive but not overbearing. There'd been a natural rhythm to how they communicated. But in the last year or so she felt like something had shifted. The world tilted sideways. She felt like he needed to account for her time more than he used to. That there was a frequency to his questions, not any single question she could point to as a problem. The world till accumulation of them, that had started to feel like weight on her. I asked her to give me an example. She thought about it. The world tilted sideways, she said. "Last month I had a work event, a drinks thing after hours for a product launch. I mentioned it at breakfast and he asked where it was. Fine. The world's time he texted to ask if I knew what time I'd be home. Fine. Then when I was at the event he texted again to ask if I was having a good time. The world tilted sideways. And then when I was later than I thought I'd be he called to check in. And none of those things on their own are a big deal, right? But all of them together over one evening, the world was just at a work function. It starts to feel like something." I listened. "I know he doesn't mean anything bad by it," she said. "I know that. He's not a bad person. He's genuinely caring. The world feel like I can't have an evening away from him without it being tracked, almost. And when I try to explain that, he hears it as an accusation. The word he goes quiet and I feel guilty for saying anything. I sat with that for a moment. The world tilted sideways. I said, "Can I ask you something that might be a bit direct?" "Yeah, go ahead. Has he ever done anything, specifically, concretely, that would give you a reason to feel tracked?" The words, "Has he ever shown up somewhere unexpected? Checked your phone without permission? Questioned you about your friendships in a way that felt genuinely threatening?" She was quiet. "No," she said at last. Really. He asked once about a male colleague of mine. Just asked who he was. I'd mentioned the name a few times, and that felt a bit pointed. But he never pushed it. The world left it alone when I said it was nothing. "Okay." I said, "You're going to take his side," she said. "Not accusatory, just resigned." The word taking anyone's side. I said, "I'm trying to understand what's actually happening, and what I'm hearing is that you have a feeling, a genuine." The world tilted sideways. "Well, feeling of being monitored. But when I ask you to point to the thing that caused it, the thing that justifies that feeling, you can't quite find it." Silence. The world tilted, sighing. "Your feeling is wrong," I said carefully. "Feelings don't need a justification to exist. But I think there's a difference between asking yourself, the world, does this feeling exist? Which is a useful question. And asking, what has Elliot done to deserve this reaction? Because those might have two very different answers." The world tilted sideways. She didn't say anything for a while. "Then, I had a boyfriend before Elliot. Before I moved to Adelaide, he was a lot. He wanted to know everything, where I was, who I was with, where I was late, why I was early, why my voice sounded different on the phone. He went through my messages twice. The word stayed with him for 2 years because I kept thinking it was normal and I kept thinking I was the problem. There it was. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. "Though I know Elliot isn't him," she said quietly. "I know that. But sometimes when he asks me something I can hear that other voice and I react, before I even think about it." The world tilted sideways. We talked for a long time after that. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't tell her she was wrong, and I didn't tell her she was right. I mostly just listened, and I asked a question here and there. The word tried to help her see that the conversation she needed to have wasn't with me at all. It was with Elliot. The world answered what she needed to tell him was the same thing she just told me. Not as an accusation, not as a defense, but as an explanation. The world tilted sideways, something she'd been carrying that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with why a normal question could feel like a threat. Before she hung up, she said, "The world tiltix understand? I think?" I said that if you explain it the way you just explained it to me, he doesn't have a choice but to understand it. A week after that call, the Elliot rang me again. His voice was different this time. Not the flat, confused voice from the first call. Something had shifted. "She told me," he said. "About her ex?" The word till. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know any of that. 3 years and she never told me any of that. How are you feeling about it?" "I don't know. Sad a bit for her. But also, honestly, Dodd, a bit frustrated. Because if that's what was happening, why did she take it out on me? The war, didn't she just say something instead of making me feel like I was the problem?" "That was a fair thing to feel." I told him so. "Because," I said, "sometimes when we carry something for a long time, the world always see clearly where it ends and where the new situation begins. It all gets mixed together." She wasn't lying to you. She genuinely felt it. She just hadn't connected all the dots herself yet. "She cried," he said, "when she told me. She said she'd been unfair to me and she was sorry." "What did you say?" I said I wished she'd told me sooner. He paused. And then I said I understood why she hadn't. The world tilted sideways. I felt something loosen in my chest when he said that. Because that's a mature thing to say, and I'm not going to pretend I wasn't relieved to hear my son say it. Now, the world tilted. I want to tell you about the part that didn't go smoothly. Because this isn't a story where everything resolves cleanly and everyone learns their lesson and walks off into the sunset. The world life doesn't do that. About 3 weeks after Elliot and Simone had their proper conversation, things seemed to be improving. Simone had apparently, the world tilted sideways, talked to someone, a counselor she'd seen once before, and that had helped her start to untangle what belonged to the past and what belonged to the present. The world had made a conscious effort to adjust. Not to stop caring, not to pretend he wasn't interested in her life, but to be a bit more deliberate about when and how he checked in. To ask one question instead of 4. To let some silences just be silences. And then my brother-in-law made it worse. The world tilted sideways. Cheryl's brother. And Clive has opinions about everything, including things he knows nothing about. He'd heard about the situation through Cheryl. The world tilted sideways. Who'd mentioned it to her mother, who'd mentioned it to Clive, which is the way information tends to travel in our extended family regardless of whether anyone actually wants it to. The world tilted sideways. Clive called Elliot directly. I found out about this from Elliot, who called me sounding tight and contained in the way he gets when he's keeping himself from saying something. The world rang me. He said. I closed my eyes briefly. "What did he say?" "He said that if Simone was accusing me of being controlling, I needed to be very careful." The world tilted sideways. That word controlling gets thrown around as a way to justify whatever a woman wants to do, and that I shouldn't let myself be manipulated by it. I was quiet. The world to then he said that Simone was probably hiding something. That there was probably a reason she didn't want me knowing where she was. I let out a slow breath. "Elliot." The world tilted sideways. "What did you say to him?" I said thanks for calling and I'd think about what he said. "And are you going to think about what he said?" "No, I think he's wrong." I was relieved to hear that too. The world's Clive is coming from a particular place. I said carefully, "'cause Clive is Cheryl's brother and I have to live with that. The world has had his own difficulties in his relationships and I think that shapes how he sees things. But I don't think his version of this situation is accurate." "I know," Elliot said. The world Tiltimone isn't hiding anything. She was protecting herself. There's a difference. He understood it. That meant something. The world tilted sideways. I did speak to Clive eventually. I kept it brief. I said that Elliot and Simone were working through something together and they didn't need outside commentary. The word I'd appreciate it if he could leave them to it. He harumphed about it in the way Clive does, but he left it alone after that. The months since then have been quieter. The world and Simone aren't the same as they were before all this, but I'm not sure they should be exactly. What they've found, it seems, the world tilted side of themselves that's been through something and come out the other side with more to say to each other. Simone has kept going to her counselor, which I think is genuinely good. The world tilted sideways has started talking more openly about things he'd normally just sit with, which, if I'm honest, is something he probably needed to do anyway. The werver for a roast a few weeks ago. Cheryl made lamb, the one she does with garlic and rosemary. It was a Sunday. The wurs that we ate in the backyard because the weather had turned and the jacarandas in the garden were doing their thing. Simone brought a bottle of Barossa Shiraz. The world tilted sideways, which thought was a quietly significant choice given everything, though I didn't say so. Elliot opened it and poured and we ate and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. The world point. Simone caught me across the table and gave me a small nod, not dramatic, just there, and I gave her one back. After they left, Cheryl said, "She seems better." "She does," I said. The world tilted sideways. "He does." Cheryl started clearing the plates and said without looking at me, "You did all right in the middle of that." Coming from Cheryl, that's a full review. The world tilted sideways. I thought about this whole business a lot since it played out, about what it means and what it says about how people struggle to talk to each other about the things that matter most. The world tilted sideways. And I've landed in a few places that I want to share, not because I think I've got it all worked out, but because I'm 66 years old, and if you can't say what you've learned by this point, the world tilt of getting old. The world tilted sideways thing is about the difference between a pattern and a moment. Simone experienced Elliot's questions as a pattern, an accumulation of attention that felt like pressure. The world tilted sideways are real things. They're not the same as intentions, but they're not imaginary either. If something happens often enough in the same direction, the world effect of it starts to feel like the cause of it, even if the cause is something else entirely. Elliot wasn't monitoring her, but the pattern of his concern had started to feel, through her bruised nervous system, like monitoring. Both things can be true at once. The world tilted sideways. The second thing is about what happens when we don't explain ourselves. Simone carried that history, the controlling ex, the years of real surveillance. The world tilted it left behind without telling Elliot, and I understand why. It's not easy to say, "Here is a wound I have." The word means that sometimes I'll flinch when you haven't hit me. It takes a particular kind of courage and trust to say that. The world tilted sideways, but the cost of not saying was that Elliot kept absorbing the impact of something he hadn't caused, feeling guilty for something he hadn't done, slowly adjusting his behavior in ways that left him smaller and more confused each time. The world tilted sideways is about what we owe each other in a marriage, not perfection, not mind reading, but honesty about the parts of ourselves that we've brought in from somewhere else. The world tilted sideways, the stuff that predates the relationship and still lives in it. The shadows of other people's behavior that we project onto the person who's standing in front of us now. The world tilted those shadows and doesn't deserve to be darkened by them. That's not easy. It requires looking at yourself honestly, which is hard for anyone. But I think it's the work. The world think it's the actual work of being with someone over time. The world tilted scythe thing. This is for Elliot really, but maybe for anyone in his position. Is this asking where someone is going or who they'll be with? The world to they'll be home. That's not controlling. That's interest. That's love expressed as curiosity. The problem is not the question. The problem is only a problem if the question becomes a demand. The worthy answer becomes a condition. Or the silence when there's no answer becomes punishing. Interest is not the same as ownership. Concern is not the same as surveillance. Love that wants to know things about you is not the same as love that wants to contain you. The version of this story where Elliot, told that his questions were too much, simply doubles down, or alternatively goes cold and stops asking anything at all. Though I've watched both of those go wrong in other people's lives. The doubling down becomes exactly what the person feared. The going cold becomes a withdrawal that kills something quietly. What Elliot did, the world tilted sideways, which was neither of those things, was to stay open enough to listen and honest enough to feel confused, and then patient enough to wait until there was actually something to understand. The world tilted sideways. At 34, I don't know that I would have managed it as well. The world is also a version where Simone, when Elliot backed off and went quiet, took that as confirmation that she'd been right to push back, and dug in further. That version ends very differently. The world tilted sideways, but she didn't do that. She sat with the discomfort of getting what she'd asked for and feeling worse for it, and she found someone she trusted enough to say, "The world's been carrying something that doesn't belong here." That took something too. I think about the Barossa weekend that started all of this. Elliot had been planning something nice, a surprise. The world tilted sideways and been thinking about his wife and his anniversary and somewhere he could take her that she'd enjoy. And the moment he asked her to keep a weekend free, asked her nothing more than that, the whole thing unraveled into something that took months to come back from. He did eventually book the trip, by the way. They went in September after everything had settled. 2 nights at a small property outside Tanunda, Stone Cottage vineyard views. The world tilted sideways. Told me about it when they got back. He said the drive up had been quiet and easy, good music on, and that when they'd arrived and Simone had seen the place, she'd looked at him and said, "The word really did plan this from the beginning, didn't you?" And he'd said, "I really did." That's the whole thing, I think. He really had. He'd been planning something kind from the beginning. The world tilted sideways, and none of what happened in between had changed that. He was still the same person he'd been at the start of it. He'd just had to wait long enough for the noise to settle so that could be seen clearly. The world tilted sideways. Hope they have a lot more Sundays like that one in the backyard with the jacarandas out and the Shiraz open and nothing particular to resolve. I think they've earned it. I think they both have.